I love Kevin Kwan, and I especially love his Crazy Rich Asians trilogy. Let's be real though, plot-wise, these stories aren't anything new, but they are fresh. I love setting expectations, so here we go. I am going to talk about 3 specific techniques that Kevin Kwan used to make his book series stand out with a ton of examples, because you know I love an example. At the end, we're going to look on Goodreads and figure out whether the things that I liked are also the things that other readers liked, i.e. we're gonna check to see if I'm right. And somewhere in the middle, you can expect an exciting pop-up featuring Kevin Kwan's writing advice, because I feel like if we're gonna talk about Kevin Kwan, we may as well do the thing properly. Now, because we are watching or talking about Crazy Rich Asians, I have poured myself a mimosa, which I will be enjoying through the course of this video because it is morning. There's something in this book that I've never seen in a fiction book before. Footnotes. Like legit footnotes written in the authorial voice. He uses these to translate phrases, sometimes very, very funny. Here's one. Cantonese for what are you saying, or better yet, what the hell are you talking about? He uses it for other things other than to translate. He provides background on things like schools, food, clothing items, and occasionally provides a bit of backstory or a correction. Here is one of my favorite examples. Nicholas Young sounds like an ACS boy, PT chimed in. And here is the footnote. Among Singapore's upper crust, only 2 boys' schools matter, Anglo-Chinese School and Raffles Institution. RI, established in 1823, is known to attract the brainy crowd, while ACS is popular among the fashionable set and somewhat perceived to be a breeding ground for snobs. Much of this has to do with the 1980 article in Sunday Nation, which exposed the rampant snobbery among its pampered students. This led to a shamed principal announcing to stunned students, including this author, the very next morning that henceforth students were no longer to be dropped off at the front entrance by their chauffeurs. They had to walk up the driveway all by themselves, unless it was raining. Is that not gold? I absolutely adore these footnotes. They are, one, a tool to make the world feel real. And it kind of is real, because he's like, oh hey, I'm the author and I experienced this. It adds the, what is it? Ethos, pathos, logos. It adds a bit of that like ethos to it, where you're like, oh hey, yeah, this author knows what they're talking about. Now, footnotes here are not just thrown in. They're used with a purpose to extend the feel and experience of the story. They contribute to the humor. And they're also another no-no. They're another rule that Kevin broke, which definitely explains the writing advice he gives that I absolutely adore. That is the writing advice for this video. If you are watching this video and you are liking it, please give it a like, a thumbs up below. It really helps me. I really, really appreciate it. The advice is, don't overthink. Don't censor your writing, and don't try to write for a particular audience. Write for yourself. Be bold, be crazy, forget any rules. The more authentic and truer you can be to your own voice and your own story, the more original your writing will be, and that is what will make it resonate with others. I love this writing advice. This is why I write. Oh, I love this advice. It's so good. And I need this right now. I've been struggling a little bit with writing my own stories, just in that I'm judging and censoring and overthinking my writing so much. And I've been trying different techniques to try to overcome that. And this advice of just indulge yourself. Don't overthink it, especially in a first draft. Just be authentic, true, bold, crazy. I love it. I love it. And this is something that I think I'm going to write on a post-it note and like stick on my window. So technique number 1 is the perspective. Now, a lot of contemporary romantic comedies are written from single perspective, or more recently we've seen a lot of dual perspectives. So from the girl and the guy, from the 2 different lovers. In Crazy Rich Asians, we have multiple viewpoint characters, the main ones being Rachel Chu and Nick, who are our main kind of love couple, but also Eleanor Young, Nick's mother, Astrid Leong, who's Nick's cousin, and Eddie Chang, who is also Nick's cousin. But this book is actually written in Omniscient point of view, and it is an amazing example of modernized Omniscient. Traditionally, when we think of Omniscient, we think of a very intrusive narrator. I'm going to tell you this story, and I'm going to tell you how it ends, and blah, 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 I know everything. It's a strong narratorial voice that interrupts the story and reminds the readers that they're reading a book. It's often cited as being outdated and disliked by editors. Kevin Kwan, however, has a voice that is certainly all-knowing, but does not come off as mysterious or intrusive at all. His voice is a source of truth, facts, and information, but his voice when it comes through also has this ironic, satirical, sarcastic tone, and no other defining characteristics, so it, rather than taking away from the immediacy of the story, it really adds to it. In fact, the narrator's voice leads to much of the humor in the book. Here's an example. "Stop it, Mum," Charlotte smiled through gritted teeth. "I know what I'm doing." As it turned out, Charlotte did not know what she was doing. So you see that, as it turned out, that is your omniscient voice, but it has that irony to it that really makes it fun to read. So what does omniscient mean? Well, it's third person, and it's often described as godlike, meaning the narrator is all-seeing and all-knowing. Omniscient is very different than third-person limited. And I get confused with this too all of the time, but here's how I think about it. So you can be in third person limited or third person close and still have different perspectives. If the author flips between characters' perspectives in different chapters, i.e. one chapter is from X's perspective and then the next chapter is from Y's perspective, then that's third person limited. But if they flip within chapters, then it is omniscient. Let's see a really good example of that right now on the screen. "Your Amma bakes scones." Rachel tried to imagine a traditional Chinese grandmother preparing the quintessentially English confection. "Well, she doesn't exactly bake them herself, but she has the best scones in the world. You'll see," Nick said, turning around reflexively to make sure no one in the cozy little spot had overheard him. He didn't want to become persona non grata at his favorite cafe for carelessly pledging allegiance to another scone, even if it was his grandmother's. At a neighboring table, the girl huddled behind a three-tiered stand piled high with finger sandwiches was getting increasingly excited by the conversation she was overhearing. She suspected it might be him, but now she had absolute confirmation. It was Nicholas Young. Even though she was only 15 at the time, Celine Lim never forgot the day Nicholas strolled past their table at Pulau Club and flashed that devastating grin at her sister Charlotte. Okay, so let's take this through. This is like one continuous block of a couple of paragraphs, one page of the book, and we actually go through 3 different perspectives. Now, Rachel and Nick are viewpoint characters and main characters, but this other girl hiding behind the three-tiered stand, whose name is Celine Lim, she, I'm pretty sure, never comes into the story again. She's a very minor character, but we start in Rachel's perspective. We hear her trying to imagine that. Then we switch to Nick, where Nick is, thinking about the scones, and then through a transition, so there's a very good transition, he looks around the cafe, then it says at a neighboring table, the girl huddled behind, and then we get into her thoughts. The girl huddled behind was getting increasingly excited, so we kind of zoom out a little bit. Nick's looking around the cafe. We're still zoomed out when we talk about the neighboring table, describing the girl huddled behind, and then we zoom in and we go to her thoughts. So it's a really seamless transition. It makes it very, very clear at all points whose thoughts we are hearing. He does that with Rachel and Nick by having them say a line of dialogue and using their thoughts almost as dialogue tags. Why this works so well in this book is that at its heart, the book is not about 2 people and their love story, but it's about this society, this culture of crazy rich Asians in Singapore. Kevin Kwan said, "No one was really writing about contemporary Asia and what was happening in Asia in 2009. Asia is growing up and enjoying a renaissance with wealth creation which is now being forwarded to the US and Europe. My mission was to showcase this world as accurately as I could. The focus of this book was really on the setting. The use of multiple major POV characters and omniscient POV allows for the cultural traditions, attitudes, and opinions of this world to be showcased more easily. It creates a wide, sweeping effect that makes the world seem large, real, and interconnected." The 5 main characters all bring a slightly different perspective. If you've read Anatomy of Story by John Truby, which I have a review linked to right up there, it talks about the importance of having worldview and value conflicts, 4 corners of opposition, where it's not just the characters who are in opposition, but their values and their worldviews, and I think that Crazy Rich Asians does this really well. So we have Rachel, who is the newbie and knows nothing about the world. We have Nick, who is a comfortable, high-placed member of the world who's rejecting many of its traditions and ideals. We have Astrid, who's a comfortable, high-placed member of the world, but she's kind of above it all. She's called the goddess, and she doesn't outright reject the rules of her world, but she also doesn't feel the need to comply with them or buy in. On the other hand, of course, you have Eddie, who is in the world but wants to have a better position in it and buys into it so hard that he just wants more and more and more and more, which makes him a very unlikable character. And then we have Eleanor, who is a member of the world who fought hard to get into it and thus is traditional and protective of its values. And so here in the next and last example, we can see a really good showcase of how these different worldviews are shown. I can taste the coconut milk in the soup, but what gives it the slightly tart, spicy kick? Is it kefir? Rachel asked. Show off, Eleanor thought. Good guess, it's tamarind, Daisy answered. This girl wasn't BSing. She knows how to cook. So Rachel, I hear you teach at NYU with Nick, Lorena cut in. This Francesca is getting on my nerves. We're here to interrogate Rachel, not Astrid. Omniscient here showcases the attitudes and prejudices of the characters against each other. In the scene above, they're just talking about cooking, but what's not being said it's what's not being said that creates the conflict. We know Rachel is just being herself. We can see Eleanor judging and strongly misinterpreting her intentions, and then at the very end there, we saw a neutral voice who kind of gave us the neutral, or shall we say, sane reaction. It's dramatic irony where we, the audience, know more than any of the characters. This means we know Rachel is in jeopardy and that all the forces are plotting against her before she does. That way, even though Rachel isn't doing a ton of active things, and some of the scenes aren't as perhaps action-oriented and engaging, on the surface, like, okay, they're cooking, they're making dumplings, sure. There's a huge narrative drive that keeps us reading, which is caused by this dramatic irony. The final piece we are going to talk about today is imagery and opulence. So Kevin Kwan describes himself as being very observant and visual. He worked as a designer for Broadway shows, I believe, so he is very into aesthetic. He has a lot of attention to detail, and his visual nature, I think, really comes through in the novel. He uses a few writing techniques in his narrative to really get the sense of opulence and wealth. So here is a passage that we're going to analyze together. Hundreds of orchid plants hung on different levels throughout the space, their subtle sweetness permeating the air. Rachel had never seen this many varieties, from intricate spider orchids and vividly colored vandas to the magnificent cattleyas and almost indecently suggestive slipper orchids. Tucked in the middle of all this was a round table that appeared to have been carved out of a single block of blue malachite. Its base consisted of 4 majestically fierce griffins facing in different directions, each posed to take flight. There is a lot that's done here to create imagery, and we are going to go back to grade 9 English class, and we are going to go through and highlight a bunch of things. First, I'm going to take the passage and I'm going to highlight all of the adjectives. Then we're going to highlight the verbs. Next, I'm going to highlight adverbs. So now we have highlighted the verbs, the adverbs, and the adjectives. We can see that there are few adverbs used here. They're just kind of peppered in 2 places only to give a little bit of that spice and to make things feel more vivid. The adjectives are used, but he makes sure to use a broad variety. He uses magnificent and majestic, sure, but then we have everything from sweet to blue to single to 4, really mixing up the different kinds of adjectives that we're using. Next, we have our verbs, and the verbs I think are so important. Remember, a description of something that's static doesn't have to be static. It can still be alive and vivid. I love that last sentence. Its base consisted of 4 majestically fierce griffins facing in different directions, each posed to take flight. The more active you can make your description, the better. He could have just described it as there were 4 griffins and they were facing in different directions and their wings were up high and their back legs were off the ground. Okay, sure, fine. I guess you could picture that, but it's so much easier to visualize when you put it in those active terms. So description is not necessarily just adjectives. The use of verbs, the use of, I'm just gonna keep saying it, active words. What do things look like? What are they doing? even if something is still, it could still, even if something is still, not moving at all, there still could be some kind of action associated with it. And it's that action that we can visualize, and it's that action that really leads to these vibrant settings. So I really wanted this video to be short. I was aiming for like 10 to 13 minutes on this video. And so with the Goodreads bit of it, that is not going to fit in. So I'm going to be releasing a bonus part 2 at sometime this week that you can keep a lookout for. There's gonna be part 2. Woohoo! All right. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you next time.